5.
Curry hits a three.
4.
Just for the drive. Deep left field.
3.
Patrick hit by Watt. Shaq number 10.
2.
Messi with a record-breaking goal.
1.
Welcome to BSS Sports. Now, here are your hosts, Steve and Trevor.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of BSS Sports. My name is Steve and Schill with the ever lovely Trevor Struthers. We're going to be talking the NBA Finals, looking at the NBA Draft and seeing a couple of moves already happening, looking back at the NHL playoffs, the expansion draft for the Las Vegas Golden Knights, which I still have a problem with that name, and then we're going to look at the McGregor-Mayweather thing. So, the point being, both finals ended up going to Game 6. We'll start with the NBA. It was actually the most watched final since 1998, and at that time it was the Chicago Bulls and Utah Jazz, of all people, and that was the last year that either of those teams have made a final, and also the last year that the Bulls dynasty were around. So again, Warriors taking it in 5 games. However, looking back, you'd assume that they wish they got it in 4 because they would have been the first team to go completely undefeated throughout the NBA playoffs. Trevor, do you see these two teams coming back next year, or do you think that maybe, I mean, there's rumors that LeBron James is going to move. I really don't buy them. I mean, pieces here and there are always going to move. But the Warriors look like a solid team, and nobody really was able to touch the Cavaliers this year during the season.
Yeah, they'll be back.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, obviously, that's the easy thing to say, I think, at this point. This is, 3 straight years in a row now. I don't think anybody can beat Golden State right now if they have this roster and these guys. I mean, they had a championship caliber team going into... they had a championship caliber team last year. Then they had Kevin Durant, who was arguably their best player, and all of a sudden now they're nobody can really take this team. They almost went undefeated in the playoffs here. I mean, Cleveland is the only thing that's somewhat comparable. They're the only team that was able to beat Golden State, but they couldn't beat them in a series. In the East, things are. I mean, let's face it, the East is starting to become more and more competitive. With that being said, I still don't see anybody beating Cleveland if they have Irving and James and to a lesser extent Love, but even Tristan Thompson. With the guys they have there, it's a group that performs phenomenally well because they know it's LeBron James and Kyrie Irving, and they know they have obviously the best player in the game, but also a formula of how to work around that and be a phenomenal team. And the East, do I see the Raptors getting any better? I don't think so. Are the Celtics going to be a better team next year? That's up for debate. I mean, they had obviously a strong year this year, but can they come back next year and do it? Are the 76ers eventually going to turn things around? The Bulls? I mean, I think it's going to be the exact same thing in the final next year, and I'm not necessarily if that is the case, I mean, obviously I'm going to watch it. It's going to be incredibly intriguing once again. It's going to take forever to get there because we're talking about a year from now.
And the thing with the NBA as well, it's somewhat hard to go from the last team to the first team. And who I'm talking about specifically is the Philadelphia 76ers, who are essentially trying to buy their way as the Edmonton Oilers of the NBA. They acquired another first overall selection in a trade with Boston. Now, for Boston, I think this is phenomenal because obviously they were, in the conference finals. They are having some really good seasons as of late, and they don't necessarily have time to foster a first overall pick right now. So the 76ers are picking up on that. The trade basically sees the 76ers getting a 2018 first-round pick, Boston getting a first-round pick for next year's draft, but it is protected, so if that falls through, then they get a 2019 first-round pick. And I guess the big question is, kind of relating to the Oilers, you see them trading Taylor Hall for a defenseman, which they needed, and suddenly the Oilers in the playoffs doing great. For the 76ers, I feel like they just need something that's not a rookie, but they decide to go the rookie route. Is this good for the 76ers, or is this just really shoddy management?
I mean, this is really the only way to try to build a team is to get as many high draft picks and pick good players as you can. I mean, that's what it comes down to is your ability to scout. And you don't really need great scouting ability. I mean, ask the Edmonton Oilers when it was Connor McDavid draft year and they had the first overall pick. You didn't need a single scout as a part of the organization to know who you were supposed to pick and who you needed to pick, and they picked the right guy. But yeah, so that's what it comes down to, is just trying to corral draft picks. And if you do it quick enough within the same time period, all of a sudden all these guys are the same age. And eventually it's going to come back to haunt you, in the case like it will, similar to with the Maple Leafs. And, a few years from now, when all of a sudden all these guys' contracts will be up and they have to pay them. And all of a sudden you run into issues with the salary cap. But, I mean, that's down the road. Right now you're trying to get as much young talent together as you can, and this is the proper way to go about doing it.
Now, Forbes released an article regarding the NHL Finals, and it was 6 reasons why every sports fan in America should be watching the NHL Stanley Cup Finals right now. And we're going to go over that in just a minute. You're listening to BSS Sports on 91X Alternative Radio with Trevor Struthers and myself, Stephen Schill. And the final ended up being 6 games as well. Pittsburgh ended up taking that one. I gotta say, I kind of feel like the NHL season should end a bit sooner. I don't know if it's because we're in the summer swing of things, but it just feels like the hockey season was dragged on a bit. I mean, you could say the same thing with baseball, because they have, some 100 games, and NHL is only about 80. Trev, did you like the final at least? Were you entertained for the most part?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know. The games didn't feel as close as maybe they ultimately could have been. It wasn't a lot like the entire playoffs, where we saw a lot of overtimes, a lot of close games, a lot of one-goal games. It wasn't that in the final, and it did kind of feel like these two teams were on different levels. Nashville obviously played well at home in the first couple of games of the final and won those games. They did push it to 6. It's not like they were overwhelmed in 4 or 5, but they came pretty close to it. They had a drubbing in there where they were absolutely killed in a game, and Nashville just didn't seem was up to that same level as the Penguins. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact the Penguins had guys coming back from injury. They were riding that high, and they obviously know they're a phenomenal team with some phenomenal talents, and they were able to perform on the biggest stage. In the case of Nashville, they hadn't been on that biggest stage, a lot of those guys, whereas Pittsburgh had literally won the Stanley Cup a year before. So I think that also played a little bit into the factor there.
So, looking at this article that Forbes created about 6 reasons why sports fans should be watching these NHL finals, normally teams, when they know they're going into the playoffs, they stock up on veterans, trade away the rookies. But one of the points that Forbes had on here is rookies can change everything. And relating back to the Memorial Cup final a few years ago, Anthony Cirelli getting the 2 goals as, I think, a 16-year-old for the Oshawa Generals. But in the NHL, do you agree that rookies can change everything for the finals?
They can. I mean, really, yeah, with Gensel for the Penguins, he really had a phenomenal playoff and could arguably have been in the Conn Smythe decision-making, because he did score a lot, but a lot of that also came with who he was playing with. And I mean, really, it's just being in the right spot at the right time. Artemi Panarin, a guy with Chicago, I mean, he's playing with Patrick Kane, and there's no doubt that that's helping his production. And yeah, I mean, anytime you have a young player, that's not necessarily at the level, obviously, of a Connor McDavid we're talking about. Maybe the next great, Crosby, maybe not quite Gretzky, but because he's in Edmonton, I feel like some people want to make that conversation happen eventually. But anyway, like that, McDavid's on his own little thing, but you do have guys, that like can step up in those big spots, and I mean, it's nice when it can, because I mean, obviously those are guys that are going to be around for a long time.
So, a quick few more points from this article is the best team rarely wins, and I feel that is definitely not right. The best team rarely wins. That would be a no-fly zone for me, because I mean the Penguins are the best team and they won, so I wouldn't say they rarely win, because they won the other year too.
Well, technically, it comes down to who would you consider the best team? Because I mean, if you're looking at the regular season this past year, it's Washington.
I'm just throwing it out there, though. I mean, I think if they're regarding like the actual playoffs and the finals for that, because they're saying, hey, watch the Stanley Cup finals, and they're saying that the best team rarely wins. But I mean, the past couple of years, wasn't it like LA, Chicago, Pittsburgh twice? I mean, these are some of the best teams in the league, and arguably the best team in that final.
Yeah, when it comes down to the final, I think it has pretty much been the best team for a long time. But I mean, yeah, it brings up the whole narrative. Why play the games in some cases where, I mean, hey, it happened in the NBA Finals too. I mean, we were just talking about it. Golden State, nobody can seem to beat this team. Yeah, so, I mean, that's also the very same thing. I mean, last year it was Cleveland winning the championship, so it's not like Golden State went back-to-back by any means, but they very well could have. They came very close to winning that championship a year ago, and then they win it this year. So it's very similar, I guess, in that aspect. The best team in the final this year definitely did win, but, I mean, Nashville was also somewhat close to, I mean, it was a close Game 6, and if they win Game 6, then we could go 7, and anything can happen in 7.
All right, so NHL expansion draft. We're not looking at the scrums. We're looking at the top dogs that have been exposed that the Vegas Golden Knights could pick up. Trevor, let me know.
Well, obviously, the main one that stands out when it comes to goaltenders is Marc-Andre Fleury. One that did catch my eye with Detroit, though, was Jimmy Howard. They protected him. They wanted to hold on to Howard, I suppose, and the younger goaltender, Peter Mrazek, has been exposed. Now, Detroit last year obviously was a bit of a wash, and neither goaltender, I guess you could say, had a good year per se, but that was a little bit surprising. Calgary exposed Troy Brouwer. He's the guy that could be gone now. As I look down the list, James Neal was exposed by Nashville. Plekanec from Montreal. I mean, these are guys as well with bad contracts that they'd really like to get rid of those contracts. And Plekanec, I feel like, is a guy that Montreal would really like to get rid of. A really surprising one with the Wild is Matt Dumba being exposed because he's a young goaltender at $2.5 million. And he's turning 23 this summer, so he's incredibly young, a good defenseman. That was a bit surprising. The Ottawa Senators are in a bit of a pickle. Mark Methot is a guy that they could lose because Dion Phaneuf didn't want to waive his no move. Trevor Van Riemsdyk is available from the Blackhawks. Now, with all this being said, there's also a strong chance here that teams have worked. Vegas is open to working with pretty much anybody here, and trying to work out a deal so they can keep players that they have had to expose, but they would like to keep. If you're following what I'm saying, and so I mean, I think there's been a rumor that Trevor Van Riemsdyk may not be picked by Vegas because Chicago's worked some sort of deal with Vegas. Apparently, Vegas has about 3 first-round picks lined up. Just obviously, triggers haven't been pulled yet on that, but. They've worked out numerous deals here, and that'll be interesting to see how that plays out because obviously that affects the expansion draft and who they may take. And all of a sudden, a guy that you think is an obvious choice in the expansion draft, they don't take because there's a deal in place with some other team that has that guy. So, and there's also ways as well that players can trade for somebody because Vegas picked them, and so that's where it gets really complicated. But this will be a fun week in the NHL, to say the least.
So, switching tunes just because we're getting the end of BSS Sports here. Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. We've been talking about this for way too long. I'm kind of sick of it, but they have a date. I feel that I'm not very excited about it because of how prolonged this is. They're already saying that the pay-per-view is going to cost about $100. They're going to be fighting in Las Vegas. Both fighters are going to be weighing at 154 pounds. But honestly, the biggest thing that I see out of this is potentially the revitalization of boxing in a certain generation. Trev, when you're looking at this fight, what do you think the big thing is here? Do you think this is like cementing Floyd's history, McGregor's dominance, or, as I said, getting boxing into a new generation?
Man, I have no idea. The way I look at this is it's a guy that is not a boxer going up against a guy that is arguably the greatest boxer of all time. And it's not because Mayweather hits hard, it's because you can't hit him. And that's where the intrigue of this fight comes in, is because McGregor is a guy that, though he's not a boxer, he does strike well in his MMA fights in the UFC. And so because of that, it does make an interesting, can McGregor catch Mayweather. I don't think he can. I think McGregor's going to get crushed in this fight, not necessarily physically, but scorecard-wise, and lose this fight probably by a decision. I don't see a finish happening at all, a knockout by any means. So yeah, that's what this fight really comes down to. And I'm excited for it, but mainly for the pre-fight build-up because these are two huge personalities. And ultimately, when the fight comes, I feel like it will not necessarily. It'll be a lot like Mayweather-Pacquiao, where it's like, the fear of the fight in terms of entertainment is having Mayweather dominate with his defensive boxing. That's what probably is going to end up happening in this fight, and it may disappoint some people, may make people pretty angry, but this is going to make a lot of money for obvious reasons, and that's why both these guys are doing this fight.
That's a point to make right there. If this fight is boring, if the same thing that happens with the Manny Pacquiao fight happens again, the internet will break. People will be pissed they paid $100, and MMA and boxing could take a hit over this. I mean, this has been such a publicized event that these guys could potentially make it for the next 10 years and get people excited about it, or basically tarnish it for the next 10 years. But we'll find out in August. That's it for this edition of BSS Sports. Make sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at BSS Sports. Archiving all of our works on YouTube at BSS Productions. For Trevor, Struthers, and myself, Stephen Schill, we'll catch you next Monday.